So excited you guys are back for action plan number 2. What an awesome time we had at Crossroads Winter Conference 2025. We hope that you had an amazing time as well, and we hope we'll see you back next year. If you remember back from Winter Conference, we talked about the theme committed, and we talked about what it looked like for us to place spiritual disciplines in our life. And one of those spiritual disciplines we talked about was solitude. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Psalm 46, 1 through 11. And really, when we talk about this spiritual discipline of solitude, many of you probably start to hesitate. Maybe you start to think about, man, there's no way that I can experience solitude in my life. I'm so busy. People are always texting me. People are constantly DMing me. People are constantly, voices are constantly filling my head and my mind and my ears. And there's no way that I can ever find silence or solitude in my life. I actually don't even know where to start. And today, kind of what I want you to understand and the action I want you to take away from Psalm 46 is to realize what the psalmist is trying for us to see when we experience solitude, who God is, the character of God, and what God wants us to see from Him when we experience solitude for ourselves. So I think the question for us that I want to try to answer for you super quickly is, what is solitude? And if I had to give you kind of a long definition of solitude, it would be this. Solitude is the intentional practice of withdrawing to a private space for the purpose of deepening one's spiritual connection with God. That's a long definition of solitude. But if I had to give you a short definition of solitude, it's this. It's to get away to spend time with God. It's to get away to spend time with God. It's a private space. It's a time for you to be silent, to drown out all the voices, to get away, to drown it all out, to spend time, to deepen your connection with God. I remember probably about 2 or 3 months ago, there was a time where I took a day off of work. It was a Wednesday, and it was kind of last minute, and I rode up to the mountains of North Carolina, and I went for a half-day hike. And I remember I took really no electronics. I had my cell phone with me, but I remember I was going to turn off my cell phone. I dropped a pin over to my wife so she could see the location that I was at. And I told her, I said, hey, I'm going on about a 3-hour long hike. I was going to hike about an hour down. I would hike an hour back. And I was going to sit and I was going to read. And for me, that was going to be relaxing. And for some of you, like, man, that's not relaxing at all. When turning off electronics, that doesn't sound appeasing. But for me, I was like, man, turning off some electronics for a little bit sounds great. I just want to be still. I just want to be with nature. I just want to be with the Lord and kind of hear from Him for a little bit. We were coming off a busy summer with summer camp. Our kids were just starting back into school. It was time for me to just kind of rest and relax and hear from the Lord. I was going down on this couple miles of a hike, and I remember getting almost all the way down. I was like, man, it does kind of feel weird for me to not have any electronics with me. It kind of feels weird for me not to have my phone out texting or scrolling social media or watching a Netflix show. It kind of feels weird to not have something distracting me or music playing in my ears while I'm walking or exercising. I was disconnected from the outside world. It was just literally me by myself. There was nobody else on this hike. And it kind of felt scared for a little bit, if I'm honest. And I think that's the problem with a lot of us right now, is that we've allowed the world to rob us of the connection that God has called us to on our spiritual walks. We've allowed ourselves to rob us of the connection that God has called us to with His Son, Jesus, that our identity is now found in material possessions and social media and friendships, relationships, that our identity has now shifted from a godly identity to an identity of idolatry, where everything that we now find ourselves is wrapped in this worldly idolatry. And I think the question for all of us is, if this is our reality, then how could the spiritual discipline of solitude even be relevant in our lives today? How can we drown out the noise? How can we drown out all the voices and actually hear from God? And I think what the psalmist wants us to hear today in Psalm 46 is he wants us to see the character of God revealed, and how when we experience silence and solitude, we get to see who God is. In Psalm 46, verse 1, it reads like this. It says, God is our refuge and strength, a helper who is always found in times of trouble. Therefore we will not be afraid, though the earth trembles and the mountains topple into the depths of the sea. Though its waters roar and foams and the mountains quake with its turmoil, there is a river. Its streams delight in the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. God is within her. She will not be toppled. God will help her when the morning dawns. Nations rage, kingdoms topple. The earth melts when he lifts his voice. The Lord of armies is within us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Come see the works of the Lord, who brings devastation on the earth. He makes war cease throughout the earth. He shatters bows and cuts spears to pieces. He sets wagons ablaze. Be still and know that I am God. Exalted among the nations, exalted on the earth. The Lord of armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. We see God all throughout Psalm 46. And I'm going to show you 3 things of how we see the characteristics of God displayed when we experience silence and solitude in our life. We experience silence and solitude in our life. The first thing we see is this, is that God is our help. Our help in time of need. I remember even just a few nights ago when our 2-year-old was crying at almost 9 o'clock at night. He was crying. He was having a bad dream. And I remember my wife would go in and get him. He's usually crying for his mom. If he's crying at night or crying throughout the day, he's usually crying for mom, as mothers are usually the caretaker, the nurturer for kids at that age. And I remember he was crying, and my wife looked at our 2-year-old at night, and he looked and said, Daddy, Daddy. I remember in that moment, it kind of just drew me to the realization that as a father, I'm there to be a helper. And for us, we look to God to be our help. We experience the chaos. We experience the pain in our life. We experience suffering in our life. We experience the trials and tribulations in our life. God is our help. The psalmist here in Psalm 46, this psalm actually starts out very different than most other psalms. In most of the psalms, the psalmist or David would write about times of crisis at the very beginning. But here in Psalm 46, it starts out with how God is a provider, how God is showing provision for the psalmist here. It says, God is our refuge and strength, that he is a helper who is always found in times of trouble. So for us, when we experience silence, when we get away, when we drown out the voices, when we drown out what the world is trying to tell us, we experience God as our helper, that he is our refuge and our strength. The second thing that we see when we experience silence and solitude is we experience God as our provision. We experience God as our provider. It would tell us in verse 4, the psalmist would write, that there is a river. Its streams delight the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. It would tell us here that he is the provision, the provider of all things in this life. That the river streams, that it would delight the city of God, that it would please them in this time. I remember in my life, there were times when chaos would ensue, that I would want to do everything. I would want to go to everybody to seek out their counsel instead of going to the Lord. And maybe for you, that's true as well. You would seek out your friend's advice. You would seek out your parents' advice. And the last person you would go to in a time of need would be the Lord. Right here, the psalmist is writing that he is our refuge, he is our strength, that he is our provision, our provider in all times of chaos, in all times of need, that we run to the Lord. When we experience silence and solitude in our life, we understand that no other thing in this world, no other person, no other human in this world can satisfy us or provide for us like the Lord can. We must drown out all the noise, all the voices, all the advice from everybody else. And we must constantly listen for the voice of God in our lives. The third thing is this. It comes from verse 8 through 11. It says this: "Come see the works of the Lord, who brings devastation on the earth. He makes war cease throughout the earth. He shatters bows and cuts spears to pieces. He sets wagons ablaze. Be still and know that I am God, exalted among the nations, exalted on the earth. The Lord of armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold." We experience silence and solitude in our life. We come to the realization that he is still God. That we are able to be still and know that he is God. That we are not God, that we cannot play God, that we cannot be God in our own lives, that we are still, that we know that he is God. Even in John 3:30, when it tells us that he must increase and that I must decrease. When we're still, something around us happens. When we're still and we drown out all the voices in our lives, when nothing else around us is happening, this stillness in our lives leads us to knowing God more. And not just knowing God more, but noticing God more. That our eyes and our ears and our hearts and our mind are in tune to what God is trying to say to us and speak to us. Everything around us starts to notice God and to know God more when we're still. We hear from God, start to notice who God is, even in the midst of our trials and our suffering and our pain and the chaos. The psalmist writes this perfectly, that we must be still, experience the silence and solitude in our life so that we can know God more and notice God more. So the application for us here and the action for us is pick a time this week, just one day this week, to be silent, to be still. 5 minutes, 10 minutes this week to be silent and to practice a spiritual discipline of solitude in your life. No music, no voices, no distractions. Put all social media, all electronics away. No music, no voices, no distractions, no social media, nothing like that. Be still. Experience silence and solitude in your life and do one thing: listen for the voice of God in your life. Be still and know that he is God.